My guest today is Dr. Debbie Haski-Leventhal from the Centre for Social Impact at UNSW. Debbie, your research looks at volunteering in Australia, and with all the natural disasters of late, both in Australia and overseas, we've seen the importance of volunteers in these situations. So what motivates people to volunteer?
Yes, Leela, we had a lot of natural disaster lately, unfortunately, but we could see the silver lining in the Australian spirit of volunteerism and how people spontaneously came to help whenever and wherever it was needed. And I think it's a natural tendency of people to reach out and help when they see someone else in trouble. And the more they perceive the other person as being in distress, the more likely they are to help and volunteer. And it's also it is part of the Australian culture to volunteer. We have 1 in 3 persons in Australia volunteer, and in rural areas we see these rates much higher. It is the Australian spirit, it is a natural, humane tendency. But also I think that in natural disasters and other disasters, people start to feel helpless, they start to feel powerless. And volunteering helps them gain this sense of empowerment back and a feeling that at least I'm doing something. I'm not just watching the news all day. I'm getting downtown and I'm helping people who need help.
And what are the challenges involved in managing all these volunteers?
Yes, usually after a natural disaster we have a high rise of people wanting to volunteer and help. We had 60,000 people who registered to help in Queensland alone, and what actually happened was the website collapsed. They just couldn't handle the floods of volunteers. And also there was not enough infrastructure to manage those volunteers, see when they want to volunteer, what they want to do. Are they able, are they skillful, are they mature enough to help? So we have 60,000 people registering to help, but there is not enough people to manage and direct those volunteers, and that caused a problem, not only to the organizations who wanted to get the help into the disaster areas, but also for the volunteers who, they finally get up and do something and then no one gets back to them. So I'm not saying that these organizations are not doing a wonderful job. They've got, they're overloaded, but we might want to start and think about creative ideas on how to manage these floods of volunteers, because unfortunately, it's probably not the last natural disasters that we're going to have. So perhaps work with corporate partners who have the infrastructure and the IT knowledge on how to manage them, even create websites where people can register to not only work in the first week of the disaster, but on the ongoing work that needs to be done afterwards. And there are, technical solutions now. You could register to volunteer 2 weeks from now and get an email telling you where to volunteer and where. So there are solutions. We need to cooperate with business partners, the government, and the non-profit organizations for all of us to maintain the spontaneous volunteers better.
Mm-hmm. And what do people need to think about before they put up their hand to volunteer?
Yes, I don't want to put anyone down, but you have to consider that it's not an easy task. I just saw this morning a volunteer talking about New Zealand and how they were trying to pull something underwater and then they found a body. And this could create a really emotional difficulty for some people. So there are safety hazards, there are risks involved, but it's also emotionally draining, and people should know that. After the 9/11, many people came to volunteer in Ground Zero, but not only did they not have the safety gear that was needed, they also didn't have anyone to give them the emotional support that they needed after going to these horrific places and what they've seen there. And so research shows that 3 years later, many of them suffer from post-traumatic syndrome. We had people in Canada where the Swiss Air disaster occurred, and they just woke up in the middle of the night and ran out to help. And in the end, all they had to do was collect debris and body parts, and that was also horrific. And and many of them suffered from post-traumatic syndrome many years afterwards. So if you do go, it would be better to register and do the right thing and not just spontaneously go downtown to help, because you need to have the safety gear, you need to have someone managing you and supporting you onwards.
And I guess there would be positives too, obviously, to volunteering.
Of course. I mean, as I said before, it does give you a feeling that you're doing something that's extremely valuable. You're saving lives. You're doing something where it's most needed. And it does give you a sense of power when you feel so powerless and helpless. And of course, it's much needed. So people need to go and volunteer in these places, but it's better to do it through some of the managing organizations. And there are the state volunteering centers in Australia, and there is Volunteering Australia, and there are websites like Go Volunteer in which you could register and be direct to the right place at the right time.
Okay, great. And I understand you're working on a United Nations report on volunteering at the moment. Can you tell me a bit about that?
2011 is a really exciting year because it's the 10th anniversary of the International Year of Volunteering. So what the UN is going to do is produce a report that's going to be, may I use mind-blowing? It's going to try and shift the way we think about volunteering and bring examples from all over the world on what's happening with volunteering. Breaking myths such as the poor are too poor to volunteer and only the people with a higher income and higher education volunteer. So it's going to be really exciting to take part in this report, and I'm going to write the chapter on volunteering and social inclusion and volunteering and well-being, which are two important aspects and outcomes of volunteering.
Great. Oh, thanks very much for joining us today, Debbie.
Thank you, Leila.